So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of that history of Reflections of Manatee, a little bit about who the Freedom Seekers were and their life on the river. But really, the thrust is what we've done since the excavation. What do you do once everything is out of the ground? How do you share it with the public in meaningful ways? Now, I brought my little cat toy with me here. Let's see if it works. Oh, it does. Excellent. Okay. So Reflections of Manatee was founded in 1997 with the purchase of the Mineral Spring Park. A local couple, Jeff and Trudy Williams, saw the land up for sale for $10. They didn't really understand how the city of Manatee or the city of Bradenton in the county could let the spring go for $10, considering it was the reason why people came to Manatee County and Bradenton in the first place. So they bought the park and planted a sugarcane patch. At the same time, a land developer came along and purchased over 40 historic houses in the neighborhood and demolished them to build an apartment complex. Jeff and Trudy, not to be, put aside by a developer, obtained 3 houses that were in danger of abandonment, dereliction, and destruction. Through thousands of hours of volunteer labor, grants, and just plain hard sweat and tears, they preserved all 3 houses, restoring them to their original condition and creating the Curry Family National Historic District. I can either see you or my notes. Their intent was to open a house museum that told the story of the white Armed Occupation Act settlers that founded the old Manatee community. However, new research on freedom seekers was underway, and archival sources were pointing to the land at the mineral spring owned by Reflections as a very probable location for that community. So between 2004 and 2013, Uzi Brahm of New College joined a community research team called Looking for Angola. And he coordinated all archaeological efforts at the spring during that time. In 2006, Sherry joined Reflections to help coordinate all efforts between the community group and Reflections moving forward. So by 2013, Uzi and his students and his volunteers had found definitive evidence of the Angola community. But at the time, a large-scale excavation was impossible. They're very expensive. However, Reflections and the stakeholders weren't going to be deterred. They took the time and applied to be part of the National Park Service's Network to Freedom, which commemorates Underground Railroad sites. The director of the network has said, and this is important, so I'm going to give you a direct quote here, "Within the Network to Freedom, the Angola site is unique. It is a place that freedom seekers came to and built a community. It is a place of resistance from where they actively allied with foreign governments to fight against American slave society. It was the site of a violent slave raid, resulted in many being captured and re-enslaved. Yet others escaped and made arduous journeys to find new havens where they could continue to live in freedom. And it is a place that descendants return to commemorate and celebrate the legacy of courage and resilience that Angola still inspires in them today." End quote. In January of 2020, Reflections of Manatee, supported by funds from the city of Bradenton and the Florida Division of Historical Resources, conducted a large excavation of the Angola community in the Mineral Spring Park. You can see why they needed a little bit of funding before they could get started. That's a really big hole. We're going to get into that some more. Oops, sorry, there I'm doing my cat toy. Okay, so we continue to curate the assemblage and develop content about Angola for public engagement. In addition to exhibits and content on that, we continue to tell the story of the white settlers and their families in the Civil War in Manatee County. Our Civil War exhibit has a twist, though. It focuses on the role of the United States colored troops in the emancipation of Bradenton. Yeah, some people were surprised when they came to our reenactment. Really confused faces there. So briefly, let's just talk about who are these people that we're talking about. So the term maroon is derived from a French term, marinage. You can go home and tell your friends that you learned some really fancy language tonight. Marinage basically translates to the act of escaping slavery. Though communities of escaped slaves likely existed in the ancient world, think about Egyptian enslavement of the Hebrews or Greek and Roman enslavement of anyone they didn't like, the term maroon typically refers to a more modern enslavement of individuals, families, and the descendants of those people stolen from Africa and enslaved in the Americas. At Reflections of Manatee, we use the term freedom seekers since it clarifies the act of self-emancipation and emphasizes the ultimate desire, freedom. Freedom seeker communities existed around the world in West Africa, near modern Ghana, the Caribbean, South America, and North America. This map is not comprehensive and it does have some mistakes. This fort is not there, it's up here. And it's called either Fort Gadsden or Prospect Bluff. This is Fort Brooke, by the way, on Tampa. However, it shows you kind of the places where Maroons sought to go, to be out of the way. The bayous and backwaters of Mississippi and Louisiana, the Great Dismal Swamp of North of Virginia, the grass islands of the Little Petey River in South Carolina. In the Caribbean, they went up on the sides of volcanic mountains, and in South America, they went to the rainforest. These are not friendly, hospitable places in our climate. If you've ever visited the Everglades, you've gotten a little taste. Everything wants to kill you. Therefore, white enslavers and slave catchers were more hesitant to chase them into these environments. That doesn't mean that they were completely safe here. There was always the danger of being captured, but they were better than other things. Now, the case of Florida is a little different. It's a prickly little colony. At the time, Spain and England were not the best of friends. As the colony of Georgia was growing on the border, Spain was barely managing to hold on to La Florida. They really only controlled what they were physically sitting on. The rest of it was indigenous territory, occupied mostly by remnants of the native Floridians and Creek hunters who had come in during the 18th century. So in an attempt to fortify the borders between these two powers, Spain offered sanctuary to freedom seekers. And all they had to do was provide a little defense against the English should they decide to encroach. So some groups settled at Fort Mose. This is a picture of a freedom seeker that serves in the Spanish militia at Fort Mose. That was a little fortified community just on the edge of St. Augustine. They were, lost my train of thought. They got the same provisions as the residents of the city. Once again, it's not the same as freedom, but it's a much better option than enslavement. Other people pushed further south and they lived in the coastal river zones of South Florida, or they lived among Seminole allies around this area, which is called Paliklikaha or Old Abramstown. There's also a few in the Swanee here, but then there's this other little one right here called Angola, and that is what we are talking about today. So just to be clear, the community of Angola is in the city of Bradenton now. Had that question last time. So this is an overview of the Manatee Mineral Spring Park. The red arrow is pointing at the capped spring. Residents used the spring until the mid-20th century when the city capped it for sanitary reasons. The rumor is the residents of the local community would go to the spring for the free water instead of paying the city for city water. So the city capped the spring and solved their little problem. After the excavation, as part of the park development, Kimley Horn created a fountain feature, and you can go and you can pump the handle and the spring runs into a little map of Manatee, and it's very cute. Kids love it. The yellow arrow is pointing at the general area of the excavation. That's the part of the park we took out. And that is where we found the community. Okay. So archival and archaeological data suggests that a group of people were living at the mineral spring on the Manatee River by the 1780s. Probably not a big group. However, there was a population at the time of following the War of 1812 and the destruction of the freedom seeker community at Prospect Bluff. Basically, the Americans fired a cannonball straight into the powder magazine and blew it to smithereens. They ran south, and some of them landed at the community of Angola, which had a population explosion during the time. The ceramic data that we collected suggested the height of the community occurred between 1815-16 and 1821. In 1821, Florida became a territory of the United States, and future President Andrew Jackson took umbrage at the idea of the territory as a haven for freedom seekers, Cuban fishermen, and Seminoles. So he did what he was really good at and gathered a bunch of his indigenous allies from Alabama and Georgia and had them raid Seminole and freedom seeker communities. Angola was burned in 1821, and approximately 50 individuals were sold back into enslavement. However, others escaped south to the Everglades, where Seminole allies eventually helped them escape to Andros Island, an English colony at the time. Though Britain didn't abolish slavery until 1834, by the time they found the freedom seekers, they were mad enough at the United States to not bother to do anything about it. So what we're seeing, kind of archivally, is the freedom seekers really taking advantage of political situations between Spain, between England and the US. They were really politically aware and moving within those systems. So over time, the memory of Angola is buried in the sand. However, archaeologists know that which is buried can be dug back up. In 2002, Rosalind Howard published her doctoral dissertation on the descendants of these Black Seminoles living in Red Bay's Andros Island, Bahamas. Rosalind's research inspired the creation of that community group looking for Angola. And they pursued further excavations, at the spring. The culmination of the first stage of that research was the January 2020 excavations at the Manatee Mineral Spring Park at Riverwalk East. This is a drone photo. This is all of the trenches. There's a well feature right here that we were not expecting to find at a site with a freshwater spring. It was one of our first big questions. What is that doing there? To give you an idea of scale, this is Sherry and Uzi. This is a backfill pile from trenching it. When I stood in these trenches, they were just slightly over my head. Don't tell OSHA. We were completely within bounds. But they were big. These backfill piles were spot sifted by volunteers, and what they mostly found was evidence of the post-Armed Occupation Act community. We had a great crew, probably, no offense to my boss who's currently here, probably one of the best group of people I've had the pleasure of working with. We had a month to do a hard job, and we did it with a lot of laughter and only one threat to kill someone. That's pretty good for an archaeology crew. If you get through a month with only one threat to kill someone, you're doing good. This is an example of some of the equipment we used right here. We had a great heavy equipment operator. He was really good at understanding that this really just meant a centimeter, not a foot. He also really knew that this meant our head is right there, please don't brain me. So he was great. But what you can really see in this photo is some of how we excavated within those huge trenches. Once the trenches were dug down to the 19th century layer, we then went in and hand excavated 1 meter by 1 meter and 1 meter by 2 meter units. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. This is a 1 by 2. This is another 1 by 2. There's our fearless leader, Uzi. I know this idiot. She might be talking to you. This is a bottle feature and a small 1 by 1, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing. It was a lot of people. Most of us already had professional archaeological experience, and that helped us get a lot of work done. We also had good leadership in Sherry and Uzi, and they were really good about trusting us when we said, we should try this. And we found so much stuff, all of the stuff, everything you could ever want. Most of the artifacts, though, really were part of the later white settlement. The settlers were wealthy and they bought expensive things. They wanted their neighbors to know they could afford the good stuff. We found a lot of toys, porcelain dolls. This one is a soft-bodied doll. She has porcelain head and arms and feet. We also found a frozen Charlotte doll, which is solid-bodied porcelain and meant to be used as a bath toy. Now, I don't know about you, but my mom didn't think porcelain was a good bath toy when I was a kid. It was a display of wealth. The Angola layer was much more ephemeral in the field. It was harder to see. We didn't quite have a good idea what exactly it was we were looking at. We just knew we were looking at something really interesting. We did find in almost every layer evidence of tobacco culture, which isn't unusual at the time. Tobacco was a stimulant and nobody was worried about cancer. So you had a pipe, dad had a pipe, mom had a pipe, the baby had a little baby pipe. It was just something you did. What it said to us, though, as we were finding these things, is that the Maroons, or the Freedom Seekers, were participating in trade networks. We also know that they had access to currency and were probably participating in commercial as well as informal trade networks. This is an 1803 halfpenny of the draped bust series. The series was decommissioned in 1808, and it's highly probable this was dropped during the height of the Angola community. So it breaks up a little bit of that idea that isolation means poverty and lack of stuff. They definitely had stuff. At the end of January, we had to be done. That was it. The city, I'm going to do questions at the end. I got you. The city had given us a month and said, bye. So we decamped and took over the public archaeology lab at New College. Uzi Brahm graciously loaned us the space so we didn't have to rent lab space. We spent the next weeks listening to rumors of a very scary new virus and worrying about future funding. How were we going to get it all clean? So before the lockdown, we managed to at least get everything open and out of the collection bags and into a very rough sort. We didn't know what we were looking at. Most of it was blobs of encrusted silt. Metal, bone, I don't know. And it kind of went that way. Then we had to leave. St. Patrick's Day, we all go home and we don't come back. I spent that time emailing Uzi and Sherry, talking about workflows and how would we do the lab work if we managed to get back and if we got our funding. We did get our funding because Sherry's a top-notch grant writer, if you didn't know that about her. And we went back July 1st. Our first priority of business was get the moldy artifacts out of the bags and cleaned and dried. It took several weeks and a dedicated volunteer force, mostly members of Time Sifters. So thank you. Karen Jensen and Soretta Sparrow, pictured here, were indispensable. We couldn't let people in the lab with us because we didn't have enough space for everybody to be 6 feet apart and in masks with the exhaust fan running and the doors open. They sat outside in the summer heat through July, August, September, and washed every single one of these artifacts very patiently. Then, once they washed them, they laid them out on big trays and everything had to dry. When it was done, we had processed 31,957 artifacts and completed 4,647 artifact log sheets. In case you were wondering, we found a little something. We found a lot of something. This is a small sample of some of the things that we found and that we had to deal with. The metal was mostly nails, blobular, uninteresting metal. This was a fun find. It was a very cold Friday afternoon, and my friend Heidi and I had just pulled it out of the ground. It was the end of the day. We were filling out our closing paperwork for the unit, and we did not know what it was. So we decided in true professional fashion, it was a farm implement, UNID, unidentified. At that point, Trudy Williams, the founder of Reflections, walked by and she goes, "Oh my goodness, you found a shoe last." Heidi and I covertly looked at each other and erased our paperwork and said, yes, we did. We found a shoe last. Can you tell us what that is? And she did. She explained that this is what cobblers used to make shoes. So we know sometime in the Manatee settlement, there was a shoemaker. When I wondered how she knew that, it's because she had 7 of them under her bed, by the way. And she brought them all out to the site to share with us. We found a lot of this. This is a brown transfer print. It's a prunus blossom. We never managed to find a whole enough piece to know if it was cherries or peaches, but it was one of the two. One of the two, I know that. And then some basic stoneware. This was a utilitarian milk bottle type thing. Glass, most of it was plain, colorless, non-diagnostic, all had to be washed and counted anyway. A nice poison bottle, Just in case you're done with your marriage in the 19th century, there's a way to deal with that. It was probably aspirin or some type of medicine. So the lab work was interesting, sometimes. Sometimes it included hours and hours of endless research to identify an object or a pattern. At least we didn't have to worry about the shoe last. Other times we were forced to be more creative. This is Sherry standing on top of a table in a very OSHA-approved move to get a good height on an unidentified metal object that turned out to be some kind of well bucket. We didn't call OSHA. Other times we really needed some community experts. So in one case we called Bob Austin, who's shown here, looking at a pile of glass that we thought might be napped, like flint or chert. We weren't sure. It had some suspicious flaking marks on it, so he came down and spent all day looking at it to say, maybe? So we're not sure. Maybe. Maybe. There's that idiot again. Despite the ephemeral nature of the Angola context in the ground, as we worked through the artifacts, we did find evidence of a rich life lived on the river. The very first thing we recovered related to Angola was a pet burial. At the end of the first week, one of the crew was setting up a pump and in the process pulled a dog skull and wood fragments from the muck. Once the feature was fully excavated, we had recovered most of a medium-sized dog and numerous fragments of a wooden box coffin. That's him laid out. He's in a vault. He is not on display. This is our intern, our very indispensable intern, Veronica, holding up a little evidence of architecture that we uncovered. When my dig partner and I first saw this one in the ground, we thought it was the world's most irritating tree root because it wouldn't go away. It did not look like that when it came out of the ground. Once we got it cleaned up in the lab, it was pretty obvious housing construction, and it's a pretty simple method. The pegged end goes in the hole on the other piece. Repeat until you have a wall. We have some big mysteries though. In a post mold associated with this plank, we found this metal object. We call it the G-like object because we don't quite know what it is. It was found under a post mold, so our initial interpretation is that maybe it was intentionally placed there for some kind of good luck, good fortune, warding off negativity. We were spitballing. A couple months ago, one of our avocational historians who volunteers with us found an object just like it. It's a Model T Ford car part. Yep. There were indeed cars in the old Manatee settlement at the turn of the 20th century. That does not 100% explain how it got to the bottom of the post mold. So that still remains one of our biggest mysteries and is part of our ongoing research and continuing interpretation. It wasn't our only mystery though. All throughout this black mucky layer, we kept finding this tangled woven wire. The wire was different gauges and different hardnesses. Some of it flexed easy, some of it had a lot of boing back to it, like wire can do. It's an official term, boing back. Our first thought was maybe this is like a security system, like a tripwire, you know, if someone's coming. Or maybe it's to let you know that there's animals that can be caught or they're in a trap. But then one day it was rainy and just kind of poking at things and wishing we were not poking at things. Our colleague Mary found a piece that had weights and sinkers on them. Now, Mary's dad is a commercial fisherman, so I say she had an unfair advantage in the identification game. However, she was right. It was some kind of fishing line. Now, it made sense. We were seeing really big fish in the record, and we know they were fishing in the river, and we know they were probably fishing at Palmasola Bay, but this wire is heavy enough that they may have also been fishing in the shallower waters of the Gulf. A second possible interpretation that we run with is that the big fish were part of trade with the Spanish fishermen that were at the end of the river, and these were maybe part of river crab traps or fishing weirs of some sort. So there's a few different choices, but they do seem to be fishing. There was also a craftsperson in the community. With the barrel well I pointed out, we found this vessel. It is wheel thrown. So when we look on the bottom, it has the marks where it was on a pottery wheel. Probably one of those ones like you see at the Renfest with the guy who kicks it with one leg and, you know, by the end of Renaissance Fair season, he has one really strong leg and one weak one. Probably something like that, but it was open fired. We can see it in the paste. It doesn't have an even color to it, and that's because it wasn't fired in a kiln. It wasn't that hot. So we have someone who knew what they were doing, had access to some kind of pottery wheel, but didn't have a kiln. So we have talent, we have commerce. This is just more evidence of commerce. This is some very classic creamware. There's pooling that tells us that it's creamware. Pretty. But while we're cleaning, we didn't really know how to share this information with people. It was overwhelming. 31,000 artifacts. We know what they are. We know who they belong to, but how do we even begin to tell this story? So I took a page from my favorite archaeology museum, which is at the University of South Alabama. There's a little picture of what they're doing there. Now, Greg Wazelkoff has a very big budget to create his stratigraphy wall. Stratigraphy is a fancy word for layers of earth. And so what they did is they started with sterile sand, and they add a panel complete with artifacts for each kind of decade of growth of the city of Mobile, Alabama. Well, we didn't have that kind of money. We're reflections of Manatee and Bradenton, but we wanted to dream big. So Sherry found a painter who could match our paint exactly to the soil color samples we had taken in the field with our handy dandy and very pricey Munsell soil book. Do you see one for sale? I'm in the market, by the way. And then Sherry knew a builder who let us use his driveway and his carport and his tools to build a wall. So we decided on a corner unit because it fit the space that we had in the museum. And then we covered it with foam and we started putting artifacts into it. Some of the first things we did were create a feature. We had found a few bottle dumps, so we cut a nice hole and made a bottle dump. Overall, it came out pretty good. We are not disappointed with the end result. Take that, University of South Alabama. Ours is, thank you. Ours is also accurate. Ours is also accurate. The tan layers are kind of what we call the 20th century plow zone. It's been disturbed by heavy equipment, various building activities, animals, trees, and it's a little sampling of everything. So that's what you see kind of right here. And there was a little sampling of everything. This is a Coke bottle from the 50s, someone's spoon from, last week. Some pearlware from the 1830s right here. And then this was sort of the Manatee layer. This is the white settlement right through here. This is a 20th century intrusive bottle dump. So basically they dug a hole for a garbage can. I'm just gonna say this, if you go visit the park, please don't drink the water. What we found in the bottle dumps was a lot of stomach ailment medicine. I'm just saying, logic says don't drink the water. This very dark layer here is what I keep calling the Angola layer. This is a replica of the pet burial. Some nice big shells that they were enjoying from the river. That's quahog clam, some pipe stems, a nice whole big bunch of fish. And then the architectural pieces that we found. These pieces were not able to be conserved. They had dried during the quarantine, and once wood dries, you can't go back. So they're doing their work now on display. And then that's all over this beautiful, pristine, white, sterile sand. So our goal was for the public to see archaeology the way archaeologists see it, which is in layers of time. And this has become kind of the central focus of our exhibit on Angola. Like, where were they in time? Building the rest of the exhibit was less intense. There was one terrifying trip to IKEA. If you don't know, they don't let you out of that place. Sherry and Mary had to keep me from running away through an emergency exit. We recreated the barrel well because it was such an interesting feature that we were not expecting to find. And frankly, when we first saw the stain in the ground, it was a square, very clear square stain of darker soil. Now, when archaeologists see that, their first thought is privy. We've hit the outhouse. And the reason that's exciting is because people threw away everything in the outhouse. You broke your dishes, put them in the outhouse. You have food leftovers, put it in the toilet. Everything went in there. Now this thing smelled like an outhouse. I mean, it definitely had privy funk, but there was nothing in it. It was really, really empty, which is very baffling. And then it had this other problem of refilling itself. Now, I don't know what you know about outhouses, but they don't typically fill themselves with clean water. They weren't that nice. When we got down to the bottom, there was sterile sand and these cobbles were piled around at the bottom. Those are quartzite cobbles that are not native to the state of Florida. The closest deposits of that kind of cobble are South Georgia, getting into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. What we think is that the area around the spring was a mucky wetland that was maybe inaccessible. So they dug a well and traded for ship ballast to filter the sand out of it. Because by the time we got to the bottom, it was pristine white and you could drink that water. Maybe not after you saw what was in the bottles, but you could try. By the time we opened this exhibit, it was April 2021. We had been out of the field since January. Now we lost a couple months over quarantine, but it took us over a year to get from lab to exhibit. And we're just starting. Now, to be clear, we have not forgotten the old Manatee settlement. We haven't left the white people in the dust. They're just under a different grant and a different talk. If you want to hear that one, let me know. Rather than take a break and enjoy what we're created and rest, Sherry and I went looking for more money so we could write a booklet on the Underground Railroad. Because what we found is that nobody knew the Underground Railroad came south. Yeah, it did, right through Florida, that prickly little Spanish colony right there off the tip of the United States. It was a good choice. So the National Park Service provided funding for some research and writing and a first printing of a booklet. The story of Angola is included, but it's not central. We wanted to recontextualize Angola and put it into the broader terms of the political situation of the 19th century. Because one of the other things we had found out, in addition to not knowing that the Underground Railroad ran south, many people are unaware of the fact that before white abolitionists became involved, the Underground Railroad was already an active and growing Black grassroots movement. It was enslaved and free African Americans helping each other out. And so that's kind of where we wanted to reposition this booklet, is to put the agency back in the creation of the Underground Railroad rather than in the hero narrative that we typically get. The booklet, though technically free, we do ask for a $10 donation. Sherry's got some over here at the end if you want it. Not that we're plugging our product or anything. We ask for a $10 donation to cover excess printings. We're in our second run now. If you are an educator, the booklet is still completely free. That was always our goal, was to give something to teachers that they could read and digest quickly to present different narratives to their students. However, we didn't have anything for students. Okay, we've talked to some visitors at the museum and we've written a booklet for adults, but kids are the future of museums. If you want your museum to succeed, you need kids. So we got a little more money and another little team, and we made an activity booklet. It's kind of simple activities the kids can do while mom and dad look at the museum. There's a connect the dots for, chasing the stars on the Underground Railroad. Now, think about what you would pack if you were running away type stuff. It's for children between 5 and 8. So we started that in January of 2022 and had our launch party in February of 23. So we're now 3 years past the excavation and not even scratching the surface yet. We're continuing our effort with community outreach as I stand here talking. We're expanding our work and including field trips. We've recently gotten a grant to write a comic book compendium on Angola. It's going to be a 6-book series. We teamed up with a local comic shop called Bat City. The director of Bat City is a certified reading teacher from Texas. And one of my things is, growing up dyslexic, is how do we reach out to children who want to know more about history, but aren't going to pick up Bullfinch's mythology and get a little dip in the water. They're not going to find their history class to be the most interesting thing in the world because reading is challenging. So one of our goals is to change the format and to bring reading and history together in a more enjoyable and achievable format for children to digest. Part of our grant includes money for workshops. We're going to have one of them during this year's Juneteenth celebration with the Rosalind Walton Foundation run by Dr. Sharon Jefferson. That workshop is designed to help teachers learn how to incorporate these books for their reluctant readers and their students in general. We also recently partnered with Uzi Baram again to create a series of field trips. Students will come to reflections and participate in a series of activities designed to bring history and the arts together. So they're going to learn a dance that tells the story of Angola. They're going to contribute to a larger mural on the property. We're going to let them throw spears with an atlatl just because we have the space to do it, and why not? It's to help them engage more with the past in meaningful ways and to understand different ways of doing things. We might also put them all on a hoop skirt and let them try to walk around, but that could also be a disaster and is to be determined. One of our board members is a recognized public artist. He has had art placed around Florida. There's one in Tarpon Springs, and he was a finalist for the Parkland Memorial. We've been working on finding funding to work with him to install something on our property that reflects the ideas of the past, the Underground Railroad and safe haven, as well as our values in the present of welcome and safe. That's very important to us. And kind of our last effort that we're following up on right now is UNESCO. Sherry and his team of people have managed to put together a complete UNESCO application, and it is submitted. We don't know what's happening with it. If you know anyone in UNESCO, could you find out for us? Right now, the US is not part of UNESCO, and we don't have a representative to follow up on that, but it's one of our next steps. One of the best things we get to do, and part of why our museum is important and Angola is important, is that people come back to commemorate it. This last weekend, we just had the 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 28th annual Back to Angola Festival, where the descendants from around the Southeast and the Bahamas came back together. It's a day of art, music, celebration, there's talks, but also reunions between long-lost generations of people. This year was very meaningful to me personally. They had a keynote speaker from Ghana, Akua, and she grew up 5 miles from the slave castle at Elmina. While I was working on my PhD, my best friend Heidi of the shoe last incident was writing her dissertation on the slave cemetery at Elmina. We were able to connect two pieces of information together that would not have been without the Angola celebration. A woman who had done Peace Corps work in West Africa during her 20s, reconnected with a group of people and is going to be supporting an orphanage. So every time we have Back to Angola, new connections are made. And it's our significance in the community.